Hi, everybody. Welcome to this month's webinar. Very timely given everything that's going on in Washington and the kind of stress that it's causing for a lot of federal employees. We hope that this webinar is a resource for you. You're more than welcome to share it with friends, family, coworkers, people who you think it would be relevant to. But we're very excited to be doing it because we feel like there's a big need with federal employees to better understand what their what retirement looks like for them if they lose their job, what their options are, what benefits continue, which stop, et cetera. So the title of today's webinar is Financial Stability for Federal Employees in Uncertain Times. And I am Josh Goulding, and this is the team behind me. So what we're going to talk to you today is kind of a little bit about who we are, taking a minute to take a deep breath and go through kind of piece by piece what your benefits are, how they work, so that you're better informed to make decisions. We're going to go through your benefits, your pension, your eligibility for the pension in detail. And we do encourage you to ask questions. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box that if you click on that Q&A box, you can type in your question that will go to the team who will be able to relay that question to me. And if we don't know the answer to your question, we will make sure to follow up in an email to you, once we can look up the answer to the question and make sure we get back to you. So again, any questions you have, just pop them into the Q&A. That will go to us, and we'll be able to get back to you. So this is the 4J team, myself, Jeff, Jen, Will, and Alex, and everyone was a contributor to this, to the webinar that we're doing today. A lot of research went into it, so we hope that you enjoy it. So first and foremost, we can't think clearly, we can't make decisions if we're frazzled, if we're overwhelmed. So think of this webinar as a chance for you to kind of reset, to better understand what your benefits are, how your federal service works, how it contributes to your pension, and just take a deep breath, right? We're going to go through this piece by piece. We are available to you as a resource. If you have any questions, if you want to bounce something off of us, please use us as a resource. So the first thing to note is your benefits are protected by law, right? So your federal pensions are secured by law under ERISA and the Pension Protection Act, which was signed into law in 2006. All of your ancillary benefits, whether it's health insurance, your TSP, your FEGLI, which is your life insurance, those are protected and continue even during government shutdowns or emergencies, okay? So don't think of those as if there is a shutdown, those for some reason stop. Or if you are laid off or RIF'd, it doesn't mean you're not entitled to certain benefits that the federal government provides you. Most likely you are. So the pensions work, they're very specific. You accrue your benefits based on the number of years of service, and your eligibility to obtain that pension is a function of how old you are and how many years of service you've worked for the federal government. But even if you can't take that pension immediately, if you're laid off, for example, if you wait or defer till 62, you can then start collecting that pension. Your health insurance, if you're RIF'd, that will continue for 31 days, and then you have an option to continue it for 18 months thereafter, albeit at a premium cost. Your TSP, which is the government's version of a 401k retirement plan. So think of that as your FERS pension is, right, a guaranteed income stream that's going to be paid to you over the course of your retirement and potentially your spouse's retirement as well. The TSP is a defined contribution plan. So that's money that you've put in, the government's matched, but that money is flexible. Think of it as a pot of money that you can access how you want, when you want. And you can either keep your TSP where it is after you retire, or you can roll it over into an individual retirement account. And then FEGLI, again, lasts for 31 days, and then you can convert to an individual policy. So that's portable and stays with you, but doing so is generally going to be costly. So what are some immediate actions after a layoff to be aware of? Well, one is you may qualify to just file for unemployment compensation benefits for federal employees. It's administered by the states. Sometimes if there's a lot of processing, a lot of people submitting for them, there can be some delays, but it is something to be aware of that you should file for if for some reason that you're RIF'd and aren't entitled to severance pay. The severance pay is if you're not eligible for immediate retirement, right? So if you're basically under 60 or under minimum retirement age and there's a reduction in force, the severance pay is pretty beneficial and meaningful. It's for every year of service where you work for the federal government, you're entitled to 1 week's worth of severance pay. That is up to 10 years. So if you work for 10 years, you get 10 weeks worth of pay. Beyond 10 years, for each additional year, you get 2 weeks worth of severance pay. Okay. So if you've worked 20 years for the federal government and get RIF'd, you're entitled to 30 weeks worth of pay. And in addition, if you're over 40, there's an additional amount that you get on top of that, up to a maximum of 52 weeks of severance pay. So it's something to definitely be aware of. The only time you're not eligible for the severance pay is if you are able to start your immediate retirement annuity when you separate service. So then in that case, you wouldn't be eligible for severance pay. But for those who are under that age, you are, and it's definitely something to be aware of because it's fairly generous. We're going to be talking about a number of different terms because these are terms and things that are going to be sent to you most likely by your agency. So something called the buyout, right? Really what it is, it's a buyout offer. It's called VSIP for short, voluntary separation incentive payment, right? It's saying, hey, we're going to pay you to leave, to retire. And that's the most you're going to get from that is $25,000, right? And the idea is for people who are already at retirement age, they're not going to be entitled to severance pay, right? But if they're offered the VSIP, they can get $25,000 and immediately start their first pension. Okay, there are some caveats. It has to be serving under an appointment without time limitation, employed continuously by the federal government for at least 3 years, and obviously be in a position covered by the agency's VSIP offer. But you would know that because it's going to be emailed to you. In addition, your unused annual leave is paid to you as a lump sum when you separate from service, right? And that can be a pretty meaningful amount of money, right? So you multiply the number of hours of accumulated leave by your applicable hourly rate, and that equals the lump sum that you're paid when you separate from service. In addition, unused sick leave, that's not paid out as a lump sum, but it contributes towards your service credit years, okay? And so that will increase the amount you get from your pension, either when you retire or when you eventually collect. Okay, so we've talked about unemployment compensation. We've talked about severance pay. We've talked about if you're offered a buyout, right? Well, how does that work? Well, most likely it's going to be $25,000. If you're under your retirement age, you probably, you may want to consider not taking that because your severance pay, if you do get RIF'd, would be probably higher than that, although you'd have to look for your specific situation. We've talked about lump sum payment for unused annual leave and then how unused sick leave contributes towards increasing your pension. As a federal employee, it's, I think there's still confusion amongst a lot of federal employees of like, how does my retirement going to work? And we like to think of it as a stool with 3 legs, right? And each leg serves a different purpose. Social Security is one leg of that stool. Now that at the earliest can't start until 62 in almost all cases. Generally, it starts later when people take it at full retirement age at 66 or 67. It can be as late as 70. But that is something you pay into from your annual pay through payroll or FICA taxes. And if you haven't done so already, you should definitely get a Social Security statement online, ssa.gov/online. You can pull your most recent statement and see, based on your current work history, here's what you're entitled to get at 62, 66, and age 70. So that's one leg of the stool. The next leg of the stool is your actual pension from the federal government, okay? And that is generally not You're not eligible to start getting that in general until 62, but we'll talk about exceptions. And that's a function of how much you made and how many years of service you work for the federal government. And then lastly, the TSP. So the TSP is the only non-pension part of your retirement. And the TSP is like I said before, the federal government's version of a 401k. And that is money that you put in, the federal government puts in. It's invested based on, what you choose are your investment options. The more aggressive, right, the higher the potential for growth. And that's essentially a lump sum of money. Kind of think of it as a bucket of money that you're able to draw on, roll it over. You can use it to kind of send yourself money, every month, every quarter, once a year. Maybe you never need it, right? Other than when you have to take RMDs. So those are the three legs of the stool, and those three legs provide federal retirees with a secure and stable retirement. So let's talk about specifically right now, we're going to talk about one leg of the stool, which is the federal employment retirement system lifetime annuity, right? Your FERS pension, which is based on the average of your highest 3 years of income, how many years of service, right? Did you work for the federal government, and something called a pension factor. And your pension is secure, remember, even if you leave early, right? You're still probably eligible for a deferred pension at retirement age. Any benefits you've accrued up to the point, they stay with you, even if you're no longer working for the federal government. Your eligibility for whether you get an immediate annuity or a deferred annuity depends on factors like how old you are and how many years of service you have. So how does this formula work? Okay. There's three components. The first is getting the high three average salary. What is the average of your highest 36 consecutive months of basic pay? Years of credible service. How many years did you work in an eligible federal position, including unused sick leave? And if you pull that form SF50 I talked about, one of the boxes will show you your starting date of work, right? And you use that as your starting date, and then you can count your number of years of service from there. And then there's this, what's called a pension factor or pension multiple. Typically it's 1%, but if you're 62 or later and have 20 years of service, it goes up 10% to 1.1%. So for example, let's say you have someone who has 25 years of service, who's over 62, and high three average salary was $80,000. Their pension, okay, would be 1.1% times 80,000 times 25 years, which would equal $22,000 per year that person would receive every year as long as they lived after they retired. Okay, so that's, and we'll look at some other calculations, but I think that's a good example of how this formula works in practice. So simply put, your FERS annual pension equals your high three average salary times your pension factor times your years of service. Okay. And the pension factor, 1% per year of service if under 62 or with less than 20 years of service. And it goes to 1.1% if you can get to 62 or later and you have at least 20 years of service. So a lot of people who work for the federal government are very focused on getting to that 62 because they know that they're going to go from that 1% to that 1.1. And that's great. But if you know your whole picture, when you look at what your first pension is going to be, what your Social Security is, and what your TSP and other savings are, is it worth it to kind of suffer for the next 12 months, 8 months, if you already have enough money to retire and every day is, painful, don't think, oh, well, everything's a failure if I don't get to 62, right? There's a balancing act here between your life and how much time you have in retirement and doing what you want to do and just slugging away for an extra 12 months to get to that age 62. Okay, so when are you eligible for this immediate pension? Okay, so the first thing to note here is standard retirement, right? Is when you're 62 or older and you have at least 5 years of service. So if any of that happens and you retire, you're eligible for immediate pension. Or if you're over 60 and have at least 20 years of service, or your minimum retirement age, which we'll talk about, and have 30 years of service, you're entitled to full benefits. There are some early retirement options, which are your minimum retirement age, but you don't yet have 30 years of service. You have anywhere between 10 and 29. You're eligible to take retirement, but if you take it before 62, there's a 5% permanent reduction in your pension for each year you take it before age 62. Now, you can avoid that reduction if you just wait until 62 to take that pension. But then if your agency offers you something called a voluntary early retirement, or VERA for short, that is an exception. You don't have to wait to 62 to get the unreduced pension, but you have to meet certain requirements. One, it's got to be offered by your agency, and you'll know that by an email you receive. But then also, you have to be age 50 with 20 years of service, or any age with 25 years of service. And so this is a very interesting option for someone who's not yet at that minimum retirement age, but wants to retire. They can actually take the buyout, right, and do a voluntary early retirement, right, subsequently, and get their lump sum unused leave. They wouldn't get a severance pay in this case, right, because they're not getting RIF. They're doing a voluntary early retirement. So this is a very interesting and can be an appealing option that's worth considering, depending on your circumstances. What defines minimum retirement age? Well, you can see here it's either 55 or it goes all the way up to 57, and it depends on your date of birth. So for most people, it's going to be 56 who are still working, or 57 if you're born in 1970 or later. It goes up by 2-month increments for each year, kind of in between these here. Okay. So deferred pension, if you leave before you're eligible for retirement, you can still apply for a deferred annuity, right, at age 62. If you're minimum retirement age and you have at least 10 years, you're subject to penalty if you're not yet 62. However, the VERA, you're allowed to get access to your pension earlier and avoid the penalty as long as you meet this criteria. Okay, so there's no age-based penalty for FERS retirees under VERA. Something very important to remember. Now, I recognize you're getting less, right, than you might otherwise would have if you kept working, but it still might be okay, right? You still might be able to retire and make it under VERA. So here's the summary, a VERA summary table that shows minimum age, right, 50 with 20 years of service, or any age with 25 years of service. Minimum service requirement, 20 years or 25. OPM approves it. There's no reduction for early retirement. No one, basically no one CSRS who hasn't already retired. So we're only talking about FERS here. No reduction for early retirement. No penalty if taken after age 55. This relates to the TSP, right? So if you're retiring under VERA, you probably haven't reached 59 and a half. And as such, you may say, well, I can take VERA, but I'm going to need funds for my TSP to supplement my income. And as long as you separate service after you reach age 55, right, and you leave those funds in the TSP, you can take withdrawals and avoid the normal 10% penalty, as long as, again, you're over 55. You will get a FERS annuity supplement as well, even under VERA, but it won't commence until age 57. The other thing to note is you won't get the COLA increase on VERA until 62. Until 62, you won't get the COLA increase. So something to keep in mind, that payment's going to stay level until you get to 62. And then for health and life insurance eligibility, you must be enrolled for at least 5 years preceding the date of your retirement. And of course, because you're getting a voluntary early retirement, you're not also going to be eligible for the severance pay, but you could be eligible for the buyout and VERA. So the VSIP and VERA can work together. So let's look at a couple of examples with RIF and VSIP and VERA to kind of flesh this out. Let's take an early career kind of case study example, totally made up. Lisa, she's 35, she has 8 years of service. Agency's downsizing, so she's part of the reduction in force. So if she has a RIF, she's not eligible for FERS retirement right now. Why? Well, she's well under minimum retirement age, and she doesn't have the years of service. So what can she do? Well, one, she can collect unemployment. She also would be able to get 8 weeks, right, worth of severance pay. She probably couldn't get both the unemployment and the severance pay. She would also get her unused annual leave paid out as a lump sum. So all those things would be benefits to her, and she doesn't, and she can, because she has 8 years of service, the FERS right, the FERS pension, that the benefit she's accrued, as long as she waits to 62, she's going to get a pension benefit. It's not going to be huge, but it would be something. She's not going to be able to get any, right? She's not going to get a VISIP, not likely offered due to her early stage career. She's not eligible for early retirement. So she's going to have to, if she were RIF, really figure out a career transition plan or a transition to the private sector. But because of the way the severance pay works and how the unused annual leave gets paid out, she would at least have a buffer between ending the RIF and then when she would, need to start making money from a second job, another job. So let's talk about someone who's kind of mid-career. Carlos is 50. He has 20 years of service. He's considering retirement due to the agency restructuring. So he could get severance pay, right, if he doesn't retire, right? If he decides he gets RIF'd, he doesn't retire, he could get severance pay. He's also would be eligible for a $25,000 buyout. But if he did that, right, he would lose any severance that he otherwise would get paid, which would probably, it would be more than 25,000. And he, because he is 20 years and 50, he's eligible to retire early with pension and health benefits. So he's got to make a tough choice: take the severance and seek out work later, or use VERA for early retirement and health coverage. So that would be a choice that someone like that would have to make. And for some people, it's going to be, clearer than others. So once you're getting closer to retirement, here we have Renee, who's 58. She has 30 years of experience, right? So she's part of a reorg, eligible to retire. Is she going to be able to get the RIF, right? The severance pay, rather? No. Why? Because she's already eligible. She's minimum retirement age, 30 years of service. So she's eligible for immediate retirement. If she's offered a buyout, she could take that. She doesn't need the VERA, right? Because she's already eligible for full retirement. So she could maximize her exit by taking the buyout and then retiring with full benefits. Okay, so Renee has that option. Plus, she would get the unused annual leave lump sum payout. She would get that as well. And an unused sick leave would enhance the pension she would get. So if you're post 62, George, let's say, started with the federal government later, age 65, has 13 years of service. If George is RIF'd, is he eligible for severance? No. A buyout, right? Not applicable. VERA, not applicable because he qualifies for the immediate FERS annuity. So basically, George's situation is fairly straightforward. He can retire with his full annuity and no additional incentives are going to apply. So what if you haven't met your minimum retirement age, right? You're not yet 56 or 57 or 55, and you don't have enough years of service. So one option that not many people are aware of is you can technically request a refund of only your FERS contributions, right? You're putting in a percentage of every pay into the FERS pension system, and you can request a refund for that, and that can either be rolled over to an IRA to avoid any taxation, or it can be taken as a lump sum and be subject to tax. If you take that refund, it forfeits any future pension rights, right? So if you have at least 5 years of service and you retire, or you leave the federal government, if you don't do anything at 62, you're going to be able to collect that pension. If you take the refund, then that's gone and it's forfeited. And if you return to the federal government, prior years of service, if you don't take it, can still count towards retirement eligibility. So you can build on your previous service time and benefits. So I think that's important to note. Different calculations, okay, on a pension based on year you're retiring and your years of service. You can see at 61 with 30 years, and they're making 100,000 at the, their highest average, high three average. You're looking at very straightforward 100,000 times 1%, times 30 years is 30,000 per year. But if you get to 62, you get that 1.1%. So it's 10% higher. Everything else is the same except 62 or 61. You're getting 33,000 a year. And then that increases for COLA on top of that. 57 and 20 years, you're looking at 17,000 a year based on making $85,000 as your high income. So what are some vesting criteria for federal benefits we need to be aware of? So for the first pension, 5 years of creditable service, right? And again, use the OPM retirement services portal, review your SF50 to see how many years of credible service do you have. Next, you have your health benefits, right? And this is really important to understand. In order for your health coverage to continue subsidized by the federal government in retirement, you need 5 consecutive years of enrollment before retirement, and you must retire on an immediate annuity, including a Vera would also qualify. Your thrift savings plan, right? Your contributions and the agency matching contributions, which are 4%, that's all immediately vested. The agency also does a 1% automatic contribution, but that you typically have to wait 3 years unless you are a congressional employee, and then it can be 2 years. So to check on the status of all that, you can go log into your tsb.gov account. For long-term care insurance, there's no vesting requirement. It remains in effect as long as your premiums are paid. And once you leave the federal government, that's not subsidized by them. So you're paying for it while you're working. You'll continue to pay for it after you stop working. The FEGLI, to continue, you must be enrolled for at least 5 years before retirement, also to carry that into retirement. So your health benefits, right? FEHB that will only continue into retirement if you retire on an immediate annuity and have been enrolled for the previous 5 years leading up. So like if you worked for the government and then left the government, worked somewhere else, and then went to get your pension at 62, you're not going to be able to get FEHB would not be part of your benefit package. You still get the pension, but this is a huge benefit because the federal health insurance plan is very good. It's very inexpensive relative to alternative options. Now, here's a really important point on this. Don't forget, if you're married, right, the FEHB would cover you, but if you don't elect something called a survivor benefit where your spouse gets at least 25%, either 25 or 50% of your pension if you were to die before them. If you don't elect that, they don't get to continue your health insurance coverage. So very, very important from a financial planning standpoint to make sure you've elected that survivor benefit. One, so that some income continues to your spouse if you were to predecease them. But two, it allows them, if you're gone, to continue with the federal employee health benefit coverage. Very, very important. You have to be enrolled in Self Plus One or Self and Family at the time of your death, right? And that ensures that your spouse is covered under your health plan. If you leave the federal service, right? So we're not talking about a retirement, but if you were to leave, you can either take the option of the temporary continuation coverage, moving to your spouse's employer plan, or going to the Affordable Care Act marketplace, right? Going to the exchange. Or if you find another line of work, another job, you can obviously join the new employer's health plan. So you need to know your FEHB eligibility and the options before making any decisions. I think this is one of the most important slides here to understand. Okay, so designated survivors, right? So first pension, a spouse may receive a survivor annuity, right? And you have to elect that at retirement. For health coverage, same thing. Family coverage continues if the survivor annuity is elected. You need to make sure when you log into your TSP that you have beneficiaries who are named, right? This is a good opportunity to make sure kind of the estate planning part of your financial plan is up to date. Does it list your spouse? Does it list children? Does it list a trust? Should it list a trust, even though it currently lists children? Have you updated your estate documents but not updated your beneficiary designations. And the same goes for your FEGLI life insurance, right? Whoever you have listed as that beneficiary is going to receive that payment. And if you have no one listed, it's going to most likely go to your estate, which is not generally ideal, right? So you want to have an individual or an entity listed that's consistent with your overall estate plan. Same thing for Social Security, right? Can continue to spouse, children if they're minors, et cetera. So we want to review and update beneficiary designations, ensure the spousal consent is obtained if required for survivor benefits, understand how your pension election and your survivor benefit affects your retirement, affects your spouse, and we want to maintain copies of all the beneficiary designation forms and confirm everything with HR. So the TSP is, again, the government's version of a 401k, and it's kind of beautiful in its simplicity in that there are 5 core funds. There is a G fund, which is a government securities fund, basically treasury bills, treasury bonds. Then you have the C fund, which is an index fund that tracks the S&P 500. You have an F fund, which tracks the Barclays Aggregate Bond Index. And then you have the S fund, which is an index fund that tracks small and mid-sized companies. And then the I fund, which tracks developed international companies. So think Europe, the UK, Japan, Canada, Australia. And then there's these things called the life cycle or L funds. And those are not independent funds. Those are what are called kind of target date funds that are a combination of the 5 core funds, the G, the F, the C, the S, and the I. And the percentages that go into each of the different 5 funds for those life cycle funds will vary based on when your target retirement date is. The earlier the retirement date, the more that is going to be in conservative. The later that target date, the more aggressive, right? And the aggressive stuff is the C, the S, and the I. The more conservative stuff is the G and the F. So importantly, the TSP funds are all index funds, meaning there is no active management where a portfolio manager is saying, hey, we don't want to own this stock, we want to own this stock, or we want to move, we want to overweight this particular sector in the US, or maybe we want to own less US and more international. It's all very passive, it's very inexpensive, but it requires, I think, especially as you get closer to retirement, you to take a more active role in really understanding what you're invested, what are the risks of that investment, and how do the different pieces work together. In terms of contribution and tax treatment, you can, if you're under 50, the maximum amount you can do as the employee in 2025 is to contribute $23,500. If you're over age 50, you can do a catch up for a total of $31,000. And then there's this unique thing as part of Secure Act 2022, where if you're 60, 61, 62, or 63, you can do actually a little bit more for a total of $34,750. Within the TSP, you can do the traditional TSP or the Roth TSP. The traditional TSP gives you a tax break in the year of the contribution, so it lowers your tax liability today. But when you eventually take that money out, you will pay ordinary income tax on those distributions. You also have the option to do the Roth TSP. The Roth TSP is where you pay taxes now, so the money goes into the TSP after taxes, but then it grows tax-free thereafter. So any money you pull out in retirement from the Roth will not be subject to tax because you've already paid the taxes on it. The contributions made by the government or your agency, that always is going to go to the traditional TSP. As far as we know, there is not an option to select that goes to the Roth. Again, we mentioned this before, but I'll revisit it. The 1% automatic contribution is the only part of the contribution that is not vested until you worked for the federal government for 3 years. Everything else, the other 4%, that's fully vested immediately, meaning if you were to leave the federal government and you did a rollover, that 4% match you got in addition to anything you put in and any earnings, that all goes with you. And if you've been there at least 3 years, the whole thing goes with you. So let's talk about withdrawals, RMDs, and early retirement, specifically from the TSP. So what are your options after you separate? Well, you could take out some of the TSP, all of it. You can set up installment payments, so a certain amount comes out every month, every quarter, or you could actually turn it all over to an insurance company and get an annuity payment. You already have an annuity from your FERS pension and from social, so to also turn your TSP into, you need to make sure that you've really thought that through because that's an irreversible decision. You can also combine methods and choose, some to come from the Roth TSP and some from the traditional. So you have some, flexibility regarding those withdrawals, and you also can say, well, I'm going to leave this in the TSP, but I want to roll out half of it for more active management or to give me access to investments that aren't available in the TSP. There is a point in time, an age you reach, where the IRS requires you to start taking out a certain amount of money every year so that they can collect their taxes. So for most, that's going to be age 73, unless you're still working, okay, and then you don't have to take the RMD. The Roth TSP is exempt from our RMDs as of 2024. So if you're a Roth TSP, you don't have to take an RMD. If you roll it over from a Roth TSP to a Roth IRA, you also don't have to take RMDs. If you don't do anything, the TSP is going to auto distribute your RMD if you haven't already taken it. So here's some early retirement and reduction in force considerations, right? The age 55 rule. If there's no 10% penalty, if you're separated from service in or after the year you turn 55. So you have to be 55 or older and separate from service, and then you can access your money from that TSP and you'll pay taxes, but there's no 10% penalty, even though you're not 59 and a half. The age 50 rule, right? There's that exception if you work for federal law enforcement, firefighters, right? Basically first responders. And then 25-year exception for public safety employees with 25 years of service at any age. If you're under 55, don't fall into those. There is another kind of exception called Rule 72T that allows you to take what are called life expectancy based payments, where you're committing for a certain period of time to taking a certain dollar amount out or a certain percentage out every year. And then if you follow that formula, you can actually get the money out before 55 in this example and still avoid the penalty. But you have to follow that formula pretty rigidly. And if you don't, there can be retroactive taxes and penalties that are owed. So again, we're getting a little bit into the weeds here, but just know, hey, like I wonder, I'm 56, so I could get access to my TSP if I severed service like that. It's more to cue you to think, how does this apply to me, if at all? And what are some options I have? So transition strategies, planning for life after federal service. Obviously, before the job change, if you can be a little bit more controlled in spending and build up an emergency fund, pay off any unnecessary debt, making sure you're keeping your employment records updated, resume updated. After the job change, you need to look at your finances. You don't want to make any impulsive decisions of cashing out your retirement accounts. Right? We want to be methodical. We encourage you to speak with someone, a financial advisor, someone like us in our capacity who can kind of look at the big picture and give you advice on the best course of action. If you're working in the public sector, there is a lot of private sector demand for many people who work in the federal government, and you have some really valuable skills. So don't think just because you can't continue your work in the federal government, there's not a place for you outside. It's jarring, it's being kind of forced upon you, but you do have valuable skills and they definitely can translate. So don't think that you can't have a life after federal service. I think it's really important as well. One of the things we emphasize at 4J Wealth is the importance of looking at the big picture, being comprehensive with our financial planning and not looking at anything just as one silo, right? So when we're talking about your federal employee benefits, it's really important, but it's only one part of the picture, right? There's all these other things like, what is your overall cash flow? What is your net worth? Maybe you have savings outside the government. What's your house worth? What's your mortgage? Do you still have to send the kids to college? Are the kids still on the payroll? Do you have your estate planning done? Are there any specific legacy issues, whether it's a special needs situation or parents that are dependent on you, all of that has to really go into this decision tree in addition to your federal benefits to help you decide, hey, can I retire? Which option should I take? Which option is the best for me? And again, some of this goes down to just kind of your overall life goals. So not everyone's life goal is to have as much money in the bank and to work as long as possible so that when they pass away, they've maximized their monetary contribution to the next generation. For some, they want to do that, and that's great. But for others, they'd rather retire when they still have the ability and the energy to kind of do the things that they've always wanted to do but never had the time to do. Maybe that's a hobby or a sport or a traveling or charitable work. I mean, it could be 1,000 different things. But we think, with our firm that that's an incredibly important part of the equation that needs to be factored in. And the reality is that what's happening now is a perfect excuse for everyone who's dealing with this to kind of take inventory of what's going on in their life, what's most important to them, what do they want to do, where do they want to spend their time, and use this kind of as an excuse almost to really focus on those things. So we think this should be part of a more comprehensive financial planning discussion, without a doubt. So we have a little bit of time left. I went through things pretty quickly because I wanted to make sure we left time for questions. So if you have any questions at all, if you could please type them into the Q&A box, I would really appreciate it. And then we can go ahead and get those questions relayed to me, and we can address them. So go ahead. I'll give you guys a few minutes to jot some questions down, and then we can go from there. While you're typing in those questions, and we're going to make this available to everyone who's attended. But here are some different links, resources, links to different forums on VERA, the buyout, VISIP, reduction in force, how ordinary retirement works. So this is, we call it a survival kit, right? But it's to arm you with the information you need to make the best possible decisions. And again, we're always available as a resource for any questions that you might have. One other thing, here's some different logins, right? Your TSP, your FEHB, get into Fegley and FERS. You're going to want to establish these logins. Sometimes the TSP I know will mail a PIN before you can get in. So hopefully you have these already access to these, but if you don't, you definitely want to take the time to sign into all these different sites, talk to HR, see, hey, are there any other things I need to know about or logins I need to have where if there is a reduction in force or I do take a VERA that I need to be aware of. I think that's very, very important as well. You can go to our website and email us. You can email us individually. You can call us if you have any questions related to your federal service or finances in general. We're always available. And let's see. Any questions? Still waiting on some questions to come in. So if you have any, please ask. Second. Doesn't look like there are any questions. So if you think of anything, please don't hesitate. Hopefully that's a result of us being very, very thorough, but we will follow up with the slides and a recording of this. And if any questions do come to mind, Josh at 4J Wealth, Jeff at 4J Wealth, we're totally available, and you can also call us. So thank you so much. Let you out 15 minutes early. We appreciate you, and we'll see you for the next month's webinar. Take care.